I met Francis about 18 months ago for the first time, and I was just really impressed with. This was a guy that came across with a heartfelt sense of mission to save, to work with young people and to save lives. And as I've got to know him even more, I think I've been really impressed by his ability to, I guess, make the complex simple and engage with young people. And I've actually always found that just really encouraging. Francis leads a small counselling service out in East Auckland at a high school, at a college there. He's a great lover of the tamariki golf and fishing, and he is a published practitioner. Here is his book here, and he'll talk a little later on about it.
Maybe.
It's a practical guide to working with suicidal youth. It's a really good couple of hour read if you're a slow reader. If you're a good reader, you'd probably bang it away in way less than an hour, and gives some really useful tricks and techniques that you can apply in your practice. This is going to be an interactive webinar, so we really encourage you to get involved. And Francis, the floor is yours. Go forth and have fun.
All right. Haere mai, tēnā koe, ko Francis ahau. Welcome to this evening. I feel really honoured that you're actually letting me into your living rooms. I'd like to start with a whakatauki, because I think te reo always seems to say things best. Whakarongo ake au, ki te tangia te manu nei. Tui, 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 tuia. Tui ai runga. Tui ai raro. Tui ai roto. Tui ai waho. Tihei mauri ora. Such a beautiful line. The sacred breath of life. Behold the sacred breath of life. You imagine if suicidal people could learn that little bit of seeing every breath as sacred. It means I listen to the sound of a bird that flies, the tui, singing, sewing, stitching, binding together, everything from above, everything from below, everything within, everything from outside. Behold the sacred breath of life. If we could get people to be that still and that appreciative. Now, Torn short me up. This is actually a hijack. During the lockdown, we got a lot of things online, and they kept giving us all of these sort of gifts. So this is a special sort of brush. You can have it for $2. The trouble is you can't buy it, any of the replacements, and you can't clean it, and the brushes wear out. So that's $2 for you. I've also got an air fryer. If anyone wants that for $2, email me, you can get hold of that. They're terrible machines, impossible to clean. I've also got, and the joy of COVID, we're going to have to talk about that. I had my vegan son come and stay with me for 5 weeks. So for 5 weeks, I was getting shown these things, and it was like, hey, Dad, what a real treat. And, you know, you'd eat them and all of that sort of thing. Now he's gone, and all I can say to that is this. Go for the sausage every time. So again, welcome. Look, the title of this workshop is Working with Suicidal Youth, Keeping Our Tamariki Safe from Suicide. I want to extend that. Think about adults. Think about COVID. Think about the next 6 months. Think about redundancies, other job losses, effect on families. Suicide probably spiking in the adult world. It's already started. So this isn't just about working with youth, it's also very much working with adults. I want you to think about this thing a lot. Self-care. Think about that a lot, and we're going to be talking a lot about that. There's the most important thing in any work with people who are experiencing suicidal ideation, believe it or not, is how you are as the therapist or the parent or the teacher, how calm you are, how you can be with the subject. It's so important that you have such good self-care for you. It's so important because it's such a heavy topic. You know, there's nothing nice about it at all. So you have to be able to look after yourself really well. I really invite you to do that tonight. This is my first webinar. It's actually very hard to try and look after people through this little machine. I will try, but I actually can't see you, so I'm not going to be able to do it. So I'm going to try and keep it light. We're going to have some breaks, but I really encourage you to get your cup of tea. Hopefully you've got that there already. Do whatever it is you do to look after yourself when you're talking about a topic like this. Very, 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 very important. So my hopes for the next little while is I hope to get more of an understanding for you of why we are experiencing such high rates of youth suicide in New Zealand. We had 685 young people who took their own lives by June 30th in 2019, which is the highest rate in New Zealand and the developed world. That's disgusting. I want to look at the importance of awhi, the importance of connection, and above all, the importance of being really, really, really potent in therapy, making it potent, making it different, making it exciting, taking some risks. I want to talk about the sacredness of the therapeutic session, the I-thou relationship. Talking a bit about, are our systems broken? I think they are. I think we've got a lot of people running around doing a lot of really hard work, but I think our systems are broken. And while I'm loving what our governments are doing at the moment, I will be honest, I think they're broken because we're not getting the right sort of stuff from top down, but we'll go there a bit later. We're going to explore teenage development and potential complications. We're going to look at why we have this phenomenon, the mental level, issues our teenagers face, and potential triggers. We're going to touch into how we can work, some possible interventions that we can use when we've identified someone at being high risk of suicide. Now, this webinar is actually based on myself having a lens of people at extreme risk of suicide, not low, not medium, but when you're a therapist, every so often you get someone walk into your room and you just know that that hour you have right then might be the one that makes the difference. So we have a glimpse of what we can bring into our work. I want to talk about the importance of creating a really, really real moment. I want to talk about bigger picture politics towards the end of the presentation. So to start it off, I want to give you a bit of a map. Let's look at teenagers as having about 7 aspects to themselves. First, the family self. What I mean by the family self is what's in their blood. What are their genetics, their parents, their grandparents, their ancestors, all of that sort of thing. How does that work? Is it working well? Is it not working well? Is it causing holding, aroha? Is it causing trauma? Is it causing grief? I want to look at the cultural self. Carl Jung, everyone will know of his collective unconscious, and his concept is that as you and I sit there, we bring our grandparents, all of our ancestors, and in fact, every single experience we have is flavored by experiences of our past ancestors. So we actually look through our eyes, and that also affects how we interpret things in the world. I want to look at the social self. Friends, not friends. Harassment from people socially. Sexuality in the social self. Talking a bit about people on the LGBT continuum who often can be particularly at risk of suicide, particularly our young trans population at the moment, which is really growing and who are often a really, really at-risk population. Talking about the physical self. Do people find themselves attractive? Do they not? Do they find themselves plain? Does that bother them? Again, we don't know. Talk about the emotional self. Are their moods up and down? Are they fairly flatline? Are they more wavy? Are they okay with that? I remember once I had a friend who was bipolar, He never took his medication because he was an artist and he could never paint if he was on meds. He's happy with that. So again, it all depends. The intellectual self, the most important, perhaps the spiritual and existential self. Because when I'm working with kids in New Zealand, particularly ones who are really, really troubled, I find it's like they don't have the spiritual anchor of what is their bliss, what is their belief system, what is their true passion, or they've gone down the road where they've filled up that void with things that really aren't healthy. Talk a bit about the existential soup prospect. When I meet a kid who is suicidal, I'm actually really excited because I see it as a kid who's come with huge existential angst. He's like he or she's climbed a diving board, they're on top of the diving board, they're thinking of doing it with all these massive questions. What a golden opportunity for some outstanding personal work to come in at that point. Like, it's actually a real privilege to meet someone at that point. Because if you can get in at that point and start teaching them about self-care, you're really going to win. You've got to look at what you can help them change. You've also got to look at what you can help them learn to live with. You've got to be able to differentiate. The Serenity Prayer says that really well. And we've got to ask ourselves as a therapist, how can we help create a potent self-care plan, and most of all, an appropriate network? Because when working with any kid or any adult, the goal has to be from the therapist that we get them a safe network as soon as we can. That's got to be the goal. So there are many issues that can contribute to suicidal ideation. I see some meta-level issues. You've got the societal message. Unfortunately, it's become kind of normal. In the teenage vernacular, they talk about it a lot. When I was young, I used to talk about running away when I'd had enough. Now kids talk about, well, I'm going to kill myself. And it's kind of the same thing, not, but you know what I mean? It's saying the same thing. They're frustrated, they're distressed, they're sick of something. Oh, I'm going to kill myself rather than I'm going to run away. It's all over the news. It's all through the media. Now, there used to be a gag on that sort of thing. They took that off. I'm on the fence as to whether or not I think that's a good idea. Probably not, because I think it's too much in the media, too much on the news, and I don't know that the teenagers process the negativity of that more than just get fascinated by it, watch TV programs about it. The societal message, it's talked about all the time now. Meta level again, teenage angst. As we all know, teenagers go through some sort of existential search. It's huge. Who am I? Who do I belong to? What's the point of life? What do I believe in? What am I going to do? All of these sorts of things rumble around. So again, the opportunity to do some work there. In New Zealand, and this will probably come across a bit strangely, but I'm half French. I'm a French, Scottish, Kiwi mongrel. They're usually the best because we live the longest. But I know when I go to France, and I took my kids to France once, and you jump out of the plane, you go into somewhere like Paris, and you've got all this incredible history around you. You know, my kid was holding on to one building, and he said, oh, 19th century. And I went, no, 19th century. So you land in France, and you know who you are. New Zealand, we're so new. I forget how many years old we are, but we are basically born of yesterday. And so many kids I know, particularly Pakeha kids, don't really identify with any sort of culture. A lot of them haven't been to their homelands, they haven't been to Europe, they haven't been to London, that sort of thing. They've got all this stuff in New Zealand, but you also walk through New Zealand, and while it's a beautiful place, you don't really get a sense of history from the architecture. There aren't any cobblestones. It's so new. So for me, without that history, without that base, it's a bit like a ship without a rudder. And it can be really hard for kids to form a kind of spiritual identity, a cultural identity. Very, very hard for them to do that when in fact they haven't got a lot to pull on, particularly Pakeha. Historical trauma. There's huge links with historical trauma with suicide. Also abuse. Negativistic thinking patterns, again, the meta level. Impulsivity, mood swings. We all know teenagers are highly impulsive, and that can be a real problem when they're getting into that suicidal frame. Drugs and alcohol. I've been to a few funerals of kids that have left school. Actually, the danger is when they leave school, because there's not much going on in terms of help once they leave school. Every single funeral that I went to, drugs and alcohol were involved in the actual suicide. Social media, what kids do on social media, glamorizing and romanticizing suicide, all sitting at the top of what I think some of the causes are. The biggest one of all, I reckon, lack of sleep. They did a study recently in Australia of 10,000 kids between the ages of 15 to 18. And the results were that 80% of them were only getting 6 hours sleep a night. Now, when you think about that, the teenage brain needing at least 9, and it's also not good quality sleep because they've been blue lighting and all of that sort of thing. Lack of sleep, it is huge. We've had people diagnosed with depression who, once they've got a decent week's sleep, when parents have put in more boundaries about internet, they are no longer depressed. They never were. Other issues, a lack of positive future pace, a family history of suicide, a really hard one to work with, emerging mood and personality disorders, a breakdown of relationships, a disconnect, could be a romantic relationship. I think of, with some Māori clients that I've worked with, and I think of the raw wound of what has happened in New Zealand and how hard that must be to live with. And some of the Māori kids who know that when they walk around, adults are often looking at them out of suspicion, out of negative messages, out of once were warriors, out of that sort of thing. And kids feel that even before they get into classrooms, they feel that, they're expecting that. So I think that's really, really hard. Pacific Island population in New Zealand can be really hard because they're quite, it's a very different zone, New Zealand often, different culture, very hard to try and figure out exactly how to find your feet in that. Low resilience. I think of a bleak future planet. You know, when we were kids, there were all these resources. You'd go to school, you'd get a job, you'd go to university. It was very easy to get a job. Now I look at 200 kids going for the same job without even an interview. Like, resources are going like this. And for teenagers to be able to have a faith that they're actually going to be able to get somewhere and proceed, really, really difficult. Poverty, another definite thing, but also low self-esteem. Sexuality, bullying, social media, contagion, romantic notions. Attachment issues are also really huge when kids are contemplating suicide, and a limited notion of self-care. Now, what we need to do with all of those sort of reasons why people might be troubled is you need to be able to talk easily about all of these things. You need to identify what it is, like help them find on that map where it is they're having struggles. You need to have a lot of empathy and understanding. You need to understand how come they're feeling suicidal. You need to be able to say, hey, I really get it. I see how you're feeling that way. I understand how you get there, you know? It's not an okay thing to do, but I totally hear you, man. That's how you've got there, and what are we going to do with it? But above all, you need to reframe this as a positive thing in terms of an excellent self-care journey starting. Talk about the existential soup. Say to them, look, it's not fantastic you're feeling that way, but what an opportunity, dude. Are you ready to go on a journey? Are you ready to go on a journey to figure out how you can enjoy life, how you can learn to look after yourself, look after others? Can you have a little faith? Are you going to let me in? Are you going to let me have a shot? You really have to sell that pro-life thing to them. Again, the serenity prayer, then you start working with what you can change and also what they need to learn to accept. I'm open for some questions at this point.
Okay. Hi, everyone. It's Faye. So some of the questions that we have had, Francis, come through from Teresa. So how would you respond to a child who threatens suicide to gain attention, makes frequent remarks of not living past 18? I mean, that's quite a specific situation, obviously. But what are your thoughts?
Yeah, and people do that. I'd probably first say something like, I can see you're really upset. I would try and not look panicked. I would say things like, yeah, sometimes life can look really, really bleak. But then I'd try and find out what was happening, what was actually underneath the distress, you know, because there's some other function of the person saying that. So find out what it is that they really want. Usually what you'll find when you do that, when they're saying, oh, I want to kill myself, it's just an expression of, oh, I'm sick of this. And then once you've found that out, that's a really important distinction to make. I'll often be with kids and they'll come in and they'll say, oh, I want to die, I want to kill myself. And within 2 minutes, we've got to a different space because we've explored, do you really want to die? Or are you really sick of feeling, excuse me, I'm going to swear, are you really sick of feeling like shit? Are you sick of feeling this bad? And 9 times out of 10, within 2 minutes, they will say, oh, you know, actually, I'm just really sick of feeling like this, you know. And then you can go, so that's not really, so that's not really wanting to kill yourself, is it? And they'll say, well, actually, no, it doesn't really. Then you can talk a bit of pro-life stuff and explore where the pain's coming from. But in terms
it's about
of the
reframing it.
Reframing it, absolutely, yeah.
Right. Great. Super. Oh. Another question we've had come in are there tools to address specific thoughts around suicidal ideation and use? And I guess that comes back to what resources are available for parents and for supporters, not just the medical fraternity.
You mean tools to assess, identify suicidal risk?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've actually got that. After this presentation, there's going to be a PowerPoint coming with an identification chart. I'd really like people to have a read of that. That would answer that question. There are all sorts of tools out there. The QPA workshops are fantastic on that as well, but that's another workshop.
Brilliant.
But you've got the material coming in the post.
Super. And just one final question. Therapists often talk of client-centered therapy and being non-directive. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, Carl Rogers. I get very frustrated with how that is misunderstood and misused. Firstly, Carl Rogers was a fantastic, amazing individual, but he mainly worked with adults. A lot of therapists I know think client-centered means pretty much that you've got to go with the client most of the time. And yeah, there is validity to that. But when you're working with a kid who's extremely suicidal, you know, how directive are you prepared to get? It's a bit like you can't pace a client if they're really suicidal. You have to get them into another space. So I see client-centered more as doing what the client needs. You know, there are times with highly suicidal clients that you have to get super directive, you know, which some people would say wasn't client-centered. So I think there's a bit of a misunderstanding out there. And two, I think client-centered therapy pure works better for adults.
Great, thank you. Cool. Just one final one. We've had a couple of questions on this come through from Kate and Sally around interested in addressing suicidal ideation in under 10-year-olds and those you know, in primary and in intermediate. But yeah, your thoughts around dealing with very young youth.
With very young youth, you would find the appropriate counsellor, psychotherapist, or people that had worked with children and understood that model. I would be, because I've worked quite a bit with kids when I was younger, I'd be doing a lot of play therapy. I'd be really trying to externalise. You've got to externalise suicide, the gremlin, get it out, give it a name, put it somewhere, and then probably do it through toys, sand tray, puppets, make a lot of it game and a lot of the resolution and a lot of the healing actually with the puppets, and then or whatever medium you use, and then bring it back to them. You'd have to really make it child friendly, and certainly not just hang around in the darklands. You want to shift them out of that darklands and get into the self-care plan and get them having fun, show them that they can, show them that they're enjoying moments, you know, rather than the doom and gloom that they brought in. You've also very much, as with any person that's suicidal, got to think of the wider network, what's going on in the family, what's happening here, and network. See what you can fix. See what influence you can have in the family, sports groups, church. Build that network. So, I mean, they're only with you for an hour or whatever. You've got to really try and build that network outside so that once they leave your room, they walk into another sort of very, very safe network.
Yeah, into the igloo.
Yeah. Into the cocoon.
Yeah, great. Cool. I'll let you carry on.
I think a bit about COVID, and I've got to talk a bit about COVID. Firstly, I hope you're all well. I fully understand that there were some beautiful things that happened in COVID, but some not so good things as well. The bird life was fantastic. Lack of pollution and that, people being really friendly. I personally had good time with my 2 sons that came down, talking to a lot of parents who before COVID were having problems in the home. A lot of kids, they're actually getting on really well now. That they've learned how to relax, they've learned how to chill, so there's been an extraordinary amount of positivity come out of it. But then you've got to think, I'll talk about, mix up another 2 clients. Say you've got a girl who's 16, trans, Christian household. Her parents have told her that she's not trans, and if she was, she'll burn in hell. You've got to think of someone being in that zone for 6 weeks, and the only way this person could get out of that zone was to go to school, be with their friends, go online, go and see counsellors or a psychologist who was very queer friendly. Think of that sort of thing in the lockdown. So there were some really, really hard stories in there too. So what I noticed in my lockdown, which was actually a nice feel, we had a cocoon. We definitely had a cocoon. And I want us to look at therapy as a cocoon. What we want to do for highly suicidal people is we want to somehow help build a cocoon around and for them to network them and keeping safe. Bit of an analogy. What do they need? They need a place to be heard, a place to be understood. They need someone to walk alongside them. They need their hardships listened to. They need their strengths harnessed. They need a safety plan, of course. Most of all, they need a self-care plan. That is the most important thing. You know, the green prescription, the exercise, the eating, the bits of work, lots of fun, building lots of joy, all sorts of things you can build into a self-care plan. Yeah. Where am I going with that bit? What you need to do with these people is build that cocoon, that safety cocoon, and all around that cocoon is how safe can you get it. Talking a little bit about how-to style interventions. There's a bit of a meta level. First of all, your philosophy has to be one of pro-life, and you've got to be really passionate about pro-life selling, you know, like you've got to look like you really mean it. You've got to be really, really positive about it. The relationship building is vital. You want them to come back to you. So ideally you want to stand out, you want to be different, you want to be a bit nutty. I mean, that thing I did with the brush and the air fryer was on purpose. It's probably a bit silly, but when you're with clients and that, it's good if you jump out of the box. A lot of clients I've met have been all through all kinds of systems and they've met all kinds of people. And sometimes by the time they get to a counsellor or psychotherapist, they'll be bored. You've got to make the difference. You've really got to have that relationship become quite key for them to want to come back to. Afi and connection, making somebody feel welcome, is possibly one of the most important bits of your therapy. You want to create a space where they can, you know, where they can come and they know they're going to be loved, they know they're going to be heard, they know that you care about them, they know you're going to try and help them, that they can really, really relax. Ideally, you want to be as least intrusive as you can, but you have to know when to take charge, because sometimes you have to take charge. You need unconditional positive regard, all that 101 stuff, genuine empathy. You need to work in partnership to design and implement some sort of service. You also need to remember the teenage brain. It doesn't work properly. It just doesn't work properly. I hear a lot of people say, oh, but this is what the teenager said. And you know, I've got to believe that. And you've got to go, well, hold on. We're talking about a teenage here. Sometimes when they say things, it's real. Sometimes it's not real. Sometimes it's a bit of fantasy. We're working with a brain that is not yet developed. You're the adult, so you actually have to remember that often you're going to know more than they are, which sounds very non-PC, but you've got to remember that role. That's part of your role as a professional. So the most important aspect of any sort of therapy is the style and the potency of the relationship you have with that kid or the adult. You want to jump into their life ideally and be bold, and I try as you can, if you can, be charismatic, an energy that they really want to try and engage with. You have to show a professional and personal investment. Like, they have to know that how you would be should they commit suicide. And I know that sounds quite manipulative, but I've got on my knees at times, which, you know, and begged, you know, when I thought someone was really suicidal. One day when I found a rope in a guy's bag, for some reason he turned up just before the moment, and I was begging on my knees. Like, you've got to really show the effect it would have on you, on their family. Sometimes if I've got mum or dad in the room, I'll ask the question, how would you feel if your child committed suicide? Which sounds like an awful thing to do. But what normally happens out of that is you end up with the kid being hugged by two parents. And then you leave the room. And in that moment, some might say that's working out of guilt. I don't know. It's working out of some sort of realization of the effect on people. But those magic moments when you have family hugging, give them some space and then come back and look at a safety plan forward and self-care forward. Really, really important. You need to be creative in approach. Your environment should have all sorts of different stuff, from the books to the toys, music, particularly working with kids. They love their music. Get them on your computer. Get them to show you their favorite tunes, their favorite characters and all of that sort of thing. Culturally, get them to take you to their land. Someone comes from Greece, get them to show you Greece. Get them to show you Greek music. Like really a lot of creativity in the room. Playfulness and humour. Try and make it fun and not all doom and gloom. Like, crack a joke, get them laughing. You know, you often have kids come in the room and say, oh, life sucks and all of that sort of thing, and it's never this and that. Then you can have them laughing for 10 minutes, and then they go, well, what just happened? And they'll go, what do you mean? And you go, well, you were just laughing. You were having a good crack up. You know, so shift the mood. You really want to shift the energy. If they've come in with a highly suicidal energy, your main job is to shift that energy into a different space that you can then start working with to keep them safe. You want to get them out of there. Don't let them hang around in there. So playfulness and humour. Don't be afraid to talk about suicide. Like, let them know that you are comfortable with talking about the topic. You can let them know you're scared of the idea that they'll do it. But don't be afraid about it. Make them feel safe and that they're not going to, you know, totally upset you in the discussion, that you're okay, you know your stuff, and you're okay to talk about it. Externalize the gremlin. Look at suicidal ideation as a bad flatmate. You want to kick it out. Often I'll get kids to give it a name. I'll say, look, okay, so you've got this bad flatmate in your head and it's called suicide. What should we call it? So they come up with a name. I've got a little chair, and I'll go, well, okay, I've got a soft toy or whatever thing in the room. Look around the room. Which thing here do you think most symbolizes your thoughts of suicide? They'll pick it up, put it on the chair. It's out of them, it's over there. And then we talk about that. We don't talk about them so much, but oh yeah, so that's feeling like, try and externalize as much as you possibly can. I've got a bit of a trick that kids love. Get one of these. They've called it something Then you get them to start hitting it, right? So call it a name. One of them called it this little shit. You get them to hit it, and you get them to hit it all the way out of the room. Hit it, hit it, hit it. Get out. Then they can shut the door on it. Little things like that, creative things. So you've externalized it. By the time you've done that with a kid, they're having a huge laugh. So you've experiential sort of get up out of the chair. You don't want to sit down on the gloop all the time. Future pace, really, really important when you're working with kids that you future pace. Talk about travel. Do you want to be a parent? How many kids do you want? What sort of a father do you think you'll be? Build on all of those future pictures. Like make them bigger and bigger and bigger and get them excited about it. Get them researching stuff. Jump onto your computer. Have them look at some stuff they could be doing. Build. Future pace, instilling hope at the same time. Explore other options of dealing with distress. What else could you do? It's always the simple stuff. I mean, if you're feeling highly suicidal, best thing to do, for some people, is just go to bed. You know, watch a movie, cook a meal, have a bath. Let serotonin and endorphins do their thing. Do some simple things. Go and talk to someone. Other options of dealing with distress. You've got to look at what strengths they already have and grow on them. Most importantly, you want to build on the self-care plan. Again, the green prescription, good food, good exercise, good work, talking with family, really, really build on that and build a routine for the day. So if you wake up at 7 o'clock, teach them some visualization skills or some Google things so they start with a positive in the day. A shower in the morning, again, gets the body going, maybe a bit of a cold blast to get some adrenaline going. Good food throughout the day. Really map out their day. They're not going to use it all the time, but map out their day and ideally also give that to their parents so they can help them do that type of day. Self-care, self-care, it's what it's all about. I mean, if you're feeling highly suicidal, particularly as a kid, it is about, well, how can you look after yourself? And you can make that really exciting. Some people do contracts. I do contracts. I say to them, please, can you promise me you are not going to try and kill yourself? I'll shake them by the hand, and I'm really full on when I do that. I'm very demanding when I do that. Looking them in the eye and really wanting them to convince me. Particularly doing that in front of parents can be really potent. Network, network, network. Said it before. The school, DHBs, church, football clubs, horse clubs, other family. The more you can build the network, the better. Also, you've got to know when to refer. Very, very important. Don't be afraid of doing that. Know though, I mean, so sometimes when you're meeting with a highly suicidal client, that may be the hour. And you may need to be the one making that difference. So give it your best shot, you know. We can't possibly save everyone. There's no way of doing that. But you've got to know as a professional that you've given it your best shot. Give it all you've got. Don't be afraid to give it all you've got. Probably some time for some questions. Are there any more? I've had some that were given to me.
Oh, yes, my video's back up. Yes, we have had a couple more come through.
Yeah.
So there was, Jared has asked about youth who have problems. When you've been working with a youth and you know that they've got problems at home, there are issues there within the family unit, be there drugs, alcohol, whatever the situation might be, and the youth that you're working with isn't opening up about them, is very closed on that topic. How do you bring that into the conversation? How do you get them to open up and start that dialogue when you know that there are factors in the background that are very likely contributing to suicidal ideation?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I would try as much as possible to let them find the voice. Well, it's actually situationally dependent. I could start the session, particularly if, say, I know this information. So depending on the source, I might be able to start the session going, look, hi, we're meeting here today. How are you? Do you want a cup of Milo and do all that uffy and all that stuff? but then go, hey, you're probably wondering why you're here. They'll go, yeah, probably. I say, well, look, I've heard some stuff, so I might lead with it. That's one way of going. You don't want to go on a fishing trip and not get to where you want to go, you know. So you do have to find a way to bring that into the room. I would definitely ask the people who I got the information off. I would try and get them into a space where they were okay enough for me to bring that in.
Right. Yeah.
And I think it's sort of a little bit unfair when people go, no, don't say where this has come from in some ways, you know, like this is, when we're talking about kids, this is the potential death of a child, you know, and we have to have all the jigsaw pieces and be able to put them in there. Really, really important. So I would get it in there, maybe lead with it or come in a bit later with it by hopefully getting permission from the people. Yeah.
Great. Cool, thank you. And Bronwyn has asked, is there anything specific when talking about suicide that you feel is absolutely critical as a key point to go into your clinical notes?
Absolutely critical as a key point.
Like when after meeting with youth that are having suicidal ideation,
yeah,
what's important to include in your clinical notes?
This is going to sound a little bit hippie. Connection is the most important thing. You want to touch their soul in the meeting. You know, a lot of therapies heads up, and it's okay, you know, but and there's nothing wrong with doing heads up stuff. You want to touch their soul. You want to connect with their soul. You want them to feel truly met by you. That's probably the most important part of it. And them also knowing that you're going to do all you can to keep them safe.
Right.
Most important, connection, and them knowing that you are on their team.
Yeah. Great. Super.
The other most important thing, of course, is networking. You know, yes. That's absolutely vital. Networking with as many people as possible.
Yeah. As an extension on that, Sally had asked the question about what preventative programs and support systems are there already in place in schools, not only for children but for adults. And I'm assuming that's right across New Zealand. There's quite there is quite an extensive network of school counsellors and, you know, the support network within the school community.
Yeah, within it depends on the school. Within schools, there are school counsellors. There's often social workers. There's often a lot of material of well-being taught through PE Health, which is really good about how to look after yourself and that sort of thing. I personally don't think there's enough, but we'll talk about that a bit later on. There's also nurses, there's also other staff, there's in schools too. You want to connect them with as many functional fun things as you can. So don't just think therapy, think fun, sports teams, drama,
right.
Audio visual. A lot of our kids who are really, really shut down, real isolated. Some of our Asperger's kids, they're our audio visual team, you know. So get creative on what you've got in schools and put people somewhere where they can excel. In terms of the adult world, there's DHBs, there's church, there's private psychotherapists, psychologists, Western medical model, there's te rāwhiti, all sorts of things out there. And again, for adults, I think when people really want to get well, don't just think about medical models and therapies. Think about what's going to make you feel good, because that's actually what you want. I'll tell you what, it's a hell of a lot more fun going and having a great game of football or rugby or tennis than going and talking to a shrink, at least most of the time. So when you're networking, think wide, man, like really wide in terms of, okay, the help professionals, but also what's some good stuff you could be doing out there that brings you joy? Most important thing of all.
Great, cool, lovely. So you've got more slides to...
I have got a couple of other things.
Yeah, jump in.
So this session is really, really important. We've talked a bit about the atmosphere and the setting. You've really got to go around your room and ideally, and obviously you can't do this everywhere, but ideally if you can, put all sorts of different things in the room that people can identify with. Bits from other countries, bits of different gender, posters, artifacts, and that sort of thing. So there's something in the room that the person will be able to look around with and relate with as relating to their culture. We've talked about the awhi and the connection, sharing of stories. You know, particularly teenagers love it when you're transparent. When you share some of your life, some of the good stuff that happened, some of the hard times that have happened in your life. They love it, they lap it up. Don't do it all the time, it would be far too narcissistic. But as we're older, we know when one of our own personal stories could be really useful and pertinent to the distress they're feeling at the time, because it might be similar. So really transparent and open with them about that sort of stuff. You want to co-create that moment with them. You know, let them help you organize things a bit differently in the room. Let them help you choose stuff on your computer. You want to let them know that you feel totally privileged to be with them, that it's such an honor to be with them in that moment. I've said, bring your passion, bring all you can into it. Model your own self-care. Again, this thing, self-care, I've lost the slide. Vital thing, self-care, model that. Like in a session, stop and have a cup of tea. Stop and have a Milo. If things start getting really heavy, you go, oh, that feels really heavy. How about a Milo? Listen to some other music. Have a game of chess. Like do something that's different and breaks that heavy spell and puts you into another space. Do outrageous things. I once had a client who arrived in my room and she had a green jumper on and it was turning brown through the cutting she had done on her arm. She really cut, serious cutting. And she was all hunched over and wouldn't talk at all. I spent ages, I tried mirroring her, mirroring the body language, sitting the same way that she sits, because often that works. If you sit like your client, sound like your client, say words like your client, that's a real way that they'll start connecting with you. But nothing worked, nothing worked, nothing worked. I got quite directive because she was bleeding. I needed to get her to the nurse. I went up and sat in front of her and asked her to look in my eyes. She wouldn't do that, hunched over even more. I then sat in my chair and felt this fart coming on. So I was sitting there thinking, well, it's not exactly the most professional thing you could possibly do. But then I thought, well, nothing else is working. So I started the slow release of a truly beautiful fart. It went on, it just went through this highs and lows and crescendos. And by the end of it, I sat there, she was sitting there, and suddenly I heard, and off we went. So allow yourself to be outrageous occasionally in the session. Use what works. I hope that just didn't kill the webinar. Quickly in the session, as I've mentioned, differentiate wanting to die from wanting to stop feeling bad. Very, very, very vital. What I like, there are two people that I really like in this world of mental health. One is John Kerwin. He talks about keeping it simple. We've talked about that. So important, those steps to getting well. It's not the complicated stuff. It's those little things that bring you joy throughout the day. Valerie Adams, eat better, move a little more, take a moment. Another wonderful person in that world. I want to talk a little bit about bigger picture politics, because I am on a mission. I'm going to be honest, and I was hoping I wouldn't annoy anyone tonight. Here goes. No, let's be positive. I love my job, but I'm sick and tired of running around at the bottom of the cliff mopping stuff up. I'm sick and tired of watching colleagues burn out. I'm sick and tired of hearing DHBs get slammed, because I know a lot of them and they're such hard workers. You know, that they work really hard. They're beautiful people. But somehow, in and around all of this, the system's broken. It is just broken. You know, it's like we're all running around burning out at the bottom of the cliff, putting out fires, and our suicide rates are going up and up and up and up and up. So yeah, we're working well, but is it working? You know, I mean, are we not able to keep up with what's happening in the planet? And that's what it is. But is it working as well as it could? I have a thought, and I really want to get political, and I don't know how. So if any of you guys have any ideas on this, please get in touch with me, and maybe we can join forces on it. I think it's about government. I don't think the money is spent properly. You imagine if we had a paradigm shift to compulsory curriculum, NCEA-based teaching life skills. Year 9, Year 10, Year 11, Year 12, maybe Year 13s don't have to do it, but it's compulsory. It's part of the curriculum, and the kids are learning how to look after themselves, look after others, compassions, empathies, looking after the planet, trying to save what we're doing to it, learning all sorts of self-help, well-being tools. You imagine if that was actually from the top, the government said, okay, all schools have to do this, and it's as important as maths, English, history, all of those sorts of things. In fact, is it not more important? You know, like I've got 2 sons. I want them to be happy most of the time, not all the time, that'd be boring. But what's most important here? It just feels to me, for some reason, that New Zealand is a bit stuck in this archaic sort of curriculum delivery. We've got kids 40 weeks a year, 5 days a week. Now, can you imagine if the curriculum was switched around, so in fact self-care and life skills became kind of like the main topic? You imagine if you had a social studies class, and in the social studies class, you learn your history and all that, and that's fantastic. I used to love social studies. A lot of boys hate it now, which I don't quite get. But you imagine in a social studies class, if they did a social studies of the class, and that became a part of the curriculum. So they looked at different roles in the class, the wise person, the fool, the trickster, the class clown, the peacemaker, the warmonger. They figured out their roles in the class and how that group was interweaving. And out of that, they managed to interweave better. You imagine if out of social studies, a little bit of that was taken into each subject. So where are you in that project? A whole school wrapping around that social study, and again, tying that into curriculum. Then it goes out into the playground, then it goes out into the world. I'm so convinced we could be doing so much more with government initiative of making well-being and life. The thing is, there's lots of well-being, which is fantastic. There's lots of life skills being taught in schools, but it's a bit of it. I want to see it as the umbrella of it, right over the top of the whole thing, and everything else is underneath it. But that's the main event of an education. Got to do something, right? Not sure how to achieve it, so I'd be really curious to get some feedback on that. Questions?
Brilliant.
Are there any more?
There are. I'm just, yeah.
Cool.
There's my thing. Teresa, she's asked quite a few questions, which is fantastic. And one of them I didn't ask in the last round of questions was equine therapy and other therapies. And yeah, what are your thoughts? That was exactly, but you've just demonstrated.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because I've just been really thinking a lot about that this week. Excuse me, but I occasionally watch Home and Away. So I know some people that do equine therapy, and it's not, they get to know the horse, and in getting to know the horse, they have to be very calm, very centered, very grounded, very kind of selfless in a way, and be able to guide the horse into doing what they want the horse to do. So in that being able to really ground yourself and be that compassionate and empathic and joined with another being is a huge step in itself, that bond in itself. But then with an equine therapy, they also do groups, they also have therapy, normal type of counselling, that sort of thing, in and around having to look after another being as a project, as their carer and keeper. I think it's beautiful, really fantastic. I wish we had the money as a state to put really suicidal kids and adults into things like equine therapy, nature therapy, fishing therapy, the great outdoor, anything, instead of sitting in an office mumbling away, you know, as we do. I think it's beautiful. It's really fantastic. Grounding people in nature, that's the other thing. So many kids are so divorced from nature because they're on screens all the time, and they don't realize the beauty of the cosmos. So again, grounding them in the beauty of what we have and the privilege, really good stuff. Love it.
Brilliant.
Except it costs money.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
We need some multi-millionaires with heaps of horses, billionaires that'll do it and just pay for the whole thing.
Yep, indeed.
Cool.
Indeed. Tony, Tony is reverting back to, or referring back, sorry, I should say, to your earlier comments about encouraging youth that you're working with to reach out to wider networks, be they coaches, be they sports coaches, be they churches. And her question is, should you be contacting those organisations on behalf of the child? Should you be encouraging the child to, or the youth to make those connections themselves? Or should it be you go with them?
Ideally, I would like to be part of that setup.
Right.
Because you also want to make sure that the person at the other end is the right person, and ideally I'd want to be involved in that setup.
Great. Cool. Excellent. Wonderful.
Unless you have a Segway person that you really trust that can do that.
Okay, cool. Had resounding agreement with your comments with regards to mental health, with many saying it should be starting in primary school.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Agreement there.
Absolutely.
And be part of NCEA.
Yeah.
And,
it's a no-brainer. And then hopefully idiots like me that do this for 30 years would disappear. Well, not really, but you know what I mean? It's such a no-brainer.
Yeah.
They're a captive group of people wanting to learn.
Absolutely.
Come on. Sorry, I get very enthusiastic about this thing.
All good. Now, I do have a serious question. What about sexual abuse and the link with suicidal ideation and dealing with that very delicate?
Yeah, that's a lot of people who have experienced sexual abuse do get suicide. You've got to look at sort of 4 areas there. One is you've got to look at the logistics, like are they still at risk? Is there anything you have to do to make sure that they're out of that risk zone? That's the most at the top of the list. You've then got to think that a lot of kids who have been sexually abused, they have attachment issues. That's a whole other workshop, but you've got to work on trying to promote positive attachment and trust again. Right. Attachment's usually been really damaged. Often kids will have really dysregulated behaviour. They'll kind of be acting out the abuse in other ways. So you've got to work at trying to help them make positive decisions so they don't somehow end up in the same zone because they think that's who they are and all that's going to be. Then you've really got to work at their negative sense of self if they have that and try and build them up into believing that they're beautiful people and not the person that, you know, not left like that. So those are the 4 areas that you really want to get into with people that have been sexually abused. Interestingly, a lot of people say when working with people that have been sexually abused, it should be with the same sex therapist. Often sexual abuse therapy with the different gender therapist can be extremely potent if it works as well.
Okay.
But certainly there is a high correlation of suicidal ideation with people who have been abused.
Excellent. Cool. And what about postvention?
Postvention. We're running out of time.
We are. Yes. I'm actually. Oh yes, no, we are. Yep.
It's called After a Suicide, Practical Information for People Bereaved by Suicide. They're absolutely brilliant. They're put out by the Ministry of Youth Development. They talk about the logistics of dealing with the practical. They talk about coping with grief, things you've got to do, caring for yourself, coping with suicidal thoughts. Get some of these books from the Ministry of Health. They take you all through it. They're fantastic. This is a 2006. It's my favorite, but they're putting out new ones. But honestly, Ministry of Health, get some of these. They give you to them for free.
Ah, great. Because
Yeah.
that leads, Angelo had also asked the question about free mental health first aid training. Do you know of any?
No.
Okay.
Well, here's one.
Yes, indeed. Well, yes. Yes,
Webinars.
indeed. Yes, indeed.
Webinars, podcasts. Yes, I do. Podcasts, school TV.
Yeah.
No, that's not free. That's not free. Just look around on YouTube too.
Yeah.
I'm sure there are. Ring up Citizens Advice Bureau. Just network. Get on the phone. They'll be out there.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Fantastic. Well, I think that brings us to a wrap, Francis. Is there anything else that you would like to share?
To finish? Can I read a quick poem?
Please do.
Right. It's called Lost by David White. Stand still. The trees ahead and the bushes behind you are not lost. Wherever you are is called here, and you must treat it as a powerful stranger, must ask permission to know it and be known. The forest breathes, listens, it answers. I have made this place around you. If you leave it, you may come back again, saying here. No two trees are the same to raven. No two branches are the same to wren. If what a tree or a bush does is lost on you, just stand still, because the forest knows where you are. You must let it find you. Thank you all for letting me into your house. You have my email address. I'd love to hear from you, particularly on the stuff about trying to get MOE into gear. Questions, networking, bring it.
Wonderful.
Really keen to kōrero.
Wonderful, fantastic. Well, I will be sharing with everybody sorry, my video's off. Come back. Yes. I will be sharing with everybody your email address so that if they would like to contact you directly, they can do so. And of course, information on how to source your fantastic book, A Practical Guide to Working with Suicidal Youth. And once again, everyone, thank you so much. Oh, and Francis?
Quick plug, Helping the Client by John Heron. Get it.
Brilliant.
Brilliant book. Helping the Client, John Heron.
Helping the Client. Excellent. I will include that in the post-event information, and which I'll be sending out tomorrow morning, along with all the details. But thank you again for joining us. And again, thank you, Francis. Fantastic.
Ngā te wā. Peace.
Lovely. Good night, all. Bye.